something no one saw coming. She added a condition. Madame Rose would remain in the house, not as owner, not as guest, but as someone who would finally understand what it means to live without power. It wasn't revenge. Not the kind people expected. It was quieter, controlled, unsettling. Days later, Sandra walked through the house again. The same house, the same walls, the same memories. But everything was different. This time, she wasn't the servant. She was the owner. And Madame Rose? For the first time, she lived without control, without influence, without illusion. It should have been the end. Closure, balance. But life wasn't finished. Because something else began to rise. Something older, something deeper. A memory. Her mother's voice. A sentence she never understood. A truth waiting to be uncovered. For days, Sandra tried to ignore it. She buried herself in work, meetings, decisions, numbers. On the surface, everything was perfect. The company was growing. Her name carried weight. Her position was unquestioned. But inside, something refused to stay quiet. A memory. Soft but persistent. Her mother's voice. It had been years, yet she could still hear it. Not the coughing, not the pain. Something else. Something quieter. Something unfinished. You were never meant to suffer like this. What did it mean? Why say something like that if there wasn't more? This time Sandra didn't push it away. She went back to the village. Nothing had changed. The same dusty roads, the same worn houses, the same quiet struggle. But she had changed. And people could see it. Her old home still stood. Fragile, silent, filled with ghosts of memory. She stepped inside. Slowly, carefully. Everything felt smaller, but the emotions, stronger. She searched through what was left behind. Simple things, worn things, expected things. Until she found something hidden, a small wooden box. Her hands slowed, her breath shifted. She opened it. Inside, a photograph, a necklace, and a folded document. The photograph came first, a younger version of her mother. Standing beside a man Sandra had never seen before. He didn't belong to that life. His clothes, his posture, his presence. Everything about him spoke of wealth, of power. But that wasn't what shook her. It was how they stood together, close, connected. Her hands trembled. She reached for the document, a birth record. Sandra froze, because the names didn't match her life. Her mother's name was there. But beside it was another name. A name tied to one of the most powerful business empires in the country. Everything inside her shifted. The poverty, the struggle, the life she lived. It wasn't supposed to be hers. The truth didn't hit all at once. It settled. Slowly. Deeply. Her mother hadn't been poor by fate. She had been hidden. And Sandra, she wasn't just someone who rose from nothing. She had been taken from something. Questions flooded in. Why hide her? What happened to that man? Did he know she existed? Or did he choose to disappear? The past she thought she conquered was now bigger than ever and far more dangerous. Days later, Sandra sat in her office. The photograph in front of her, the document beside it. For the first time in a long time, she felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, but uncertainty. She began her search. Quiet. Careful. The name led her to one place. A corporation. Powerful. Established. Untouchable. A legacy built on influence and secrets. Everything pointed to one truth. He was alive. The realization settled heavily. Because this wasn't just identity anymore. It was confrontation. Sandra had faced hunger, pain, power, and she had won. But this was different. This was the truth of her origin, and there was no way to prepare for it. The final moment came quietly. Sandra stood outside a massive building. Glass walls, towering presence. power in its purest form. At the top, a name, the same name on the document. She took a breath, not as a victim, not as someone searching for acceptance, but as someone ready for the truth, no matter the cost. Then, she stepped inside. Sandra walked into the building without hesitation. But this time, she wasn't entering as a CEO chasing answers. She was entering as a daughter about to uncover the truth of her entire life. Inside, she finally met the man connected to her past, and what he revealed changed everything. Sandra was never abandoned. She was hidden. Before she was born, her family was already trapped in a dangerous web of corporate rivalry, betrayal, and violent power struggles. Her mother had been forced into hiding to protect her life and Sandra's. The man she met revealed that powerful enemies had once tried to erase their bloodline completely. To save her, her mother was moved far away and made to live as someone else. But protection came at a cost. A life of poverty, a life of silence, a life Sandra believed was fate. Everything she endured suddenly made a different kind of sense. The suffering was not destiny, it was concealment. And the real world she belonged to had been waiting for her all along. But there was a problem. The same enemies who once forced her into hiding were still out there. And now, they knew she existed again. Sandra had two paths. She could walk away, return to her life as CEO, and remain safe. Or she could step fully into the truth of her origin and inherit a war she never started. She chose neither fear nor escape. She chose control, not revenge, not revenge-driven destruction, but ownership of her truth. Sandra left the building that day with a new understanding. Her life was never about escaping poverty. It was about surviving a hidden legacy until she was strong enough to face it. Months later, her company expanded not just as a business, but as a shield. She began quietly gathering information, allies, and influence tied to the truth of her bloodline. Madame Rose's chapter faded into the past, reduced to a reminder of who Sandra no longer was. The girl from the village was gone. The house girl was gone. What remained was something far more dangerous. A woman who understood both suffering and power and refused to be controlled by either. One night, Sandra stood alone in her office. City lights stretched endlessly below her. Her phone lit up with an unknown message. "They know you've returned." She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She simply placed the phone down and looked out into the city she now understood completely. Because now, she knew the truth. Her story was never about rising from nothing. It was about rising into something she was born into and choosing what to do with it.